Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. I've always told you that the relationship between the police and the white media is incestuous. You have people like John Miller of ABC News, who has worked for the NYPD, the LAPD, and even the FBI. And you also have a lot of people from law enforcement who have worked in the white media, both in news as well as in movies and television. Before I go any further, though, I think I want to give a mention to Your World, aka Harvey, for having put this one on the radar. Everyone remembers Les Moonves, the now disgraced former chairman of CBS. He was forced to resign in September 2018 after Ronan Farrow, the same guy who exposed Harvey Weinstein, ran a story on one of Moonves' victims, Phyllis Golden-Gottlieb. And now it's finally come to light that the LAPD knew all about the accusations against Moonves a year before Farrow wrote his story. On November 10, 2017, Golden-Gottlieb went to the LAPD's Hollywood station and reported that Moonves had sexually assaulted her on multiple occasions in the 1980s. Nothing ever came of this accusation because, as a report by the New York Attorney General's office documents, the LAPD were actively protecting Les Moonves. In fact, they were working hand in hand with him to shield him from any threat of prosecution. By the way, I'd just like to say in passing, it's amazing how Letitia James can do things for the Asian community, she can do things for Democrats with her Trump investigation, and she can do things for the white media executives with this case, but she hasn't done anything for black people. Though I digress. Letitia James's office has released its report about this incident, and they found that the central figure in the LAPD's cover-up of Moonves' alleged crimes was an officer who was an LAPD captain at the time. Now, this captain is never named in Letitia James' report, but his identity was found out quickly enough. His name is Corey Palka. He's a now retired LAPD commander. Palka is also a close friend of Les Moonves. In fact, from 2008 to 2014, Palka had personally provided private security for Les Moonves at the Grammy Awards, which CBS produced. The New York Attorney General's report says that when Golden-Gottlieb went to the police to make her report, she had requested confidentiality, and that the report that she had given to the LAPD had been marked as confidential in at least 3 places. Furthermore, the California state constitution prohibits the disclosure of confidential information to a defendant, a defendant's attorney, or any other person acting on behalf of the defendant that could be used to locate or harass the victim or the victim's family. Well, you can guess what happened next. Moments after Golden-Gottlieb filed her police report against Moonves, Captain Palka immediately left a voice message for Ian Metrose, a senior vice president at CBS, to let him know what had happened. Quote, "Somebody walked in the station about a couple hours ago and made allegations against your boss regarding a sexual assault. It's confidential, as you know, but call me." So this LAPD captain had CBS executives on speed dial, and he was calling them to let them know the instant that a criminal report had been filed against one of them, and he was doing this in direct contravention of state law. And that was just the beginning of Palka's collaboration with Les Moonves and his buddies at CBS. 5 days after Golden-Gottlieb filed her report, Palka texted Moonves' personal attorney and told them that he had been in contact with the officer on the case. Palka told them that he'd instructed the investigator to make contact and admonish the accuser tomorrow about refraining from going to the media and maintaining her confidentiality and honoring the integrity of the investigation. This guy was bragging to Les Moonves' attorney that he had told the guy who was supposed to be investigating the case to make sure to tell the accuser that she better not go to the media. She better honor the integrity of the investigation. You know how in my Friday crime reports I frequently tell you about how police will occasionally have the courts seal affidavits and criminal complaints from the public, and that the cops' catch-all excuse for doing so is that they have to maintain the integrity of the investigation? Yeah, sounds familiar, don't it? And Palka wasn't the only one working to suppress this incident. The New York Attorney General's report says that CBS executives themselves went to work trying to contain the situation, with one CBS executive alerting a member of the news staff to stay close to the phone because they have a situation. This executive also told another staffer not to miss any messages and added, "I wouldn't bother you if this wasn't serious." CBS also began investigating Golden-Gottlieb's personal circumstances and that of her family. So CBS News was not just some neutral bystander. They were not in the dark. They were neck deep in this. They were fully involved in covering up their boss's misdeeds. And by the way, going after people's personal circumstances and that of their families, yeah, that sounds exactly like what the white media does whenever a black person is murdered by the police. And as we saw in the case of Freddie Gray, if they can't smear the victim directly, they'll smear the victim's family members instead. In the weeks following Golden-Gottlieb's complaint to the police, Captain Polka began working with Moonves, Metrose, and other high-level CBS executives on covering this up. Polka personally met with Les Moonves and at least one other CBS executive. That's important. He didn't just call them on the phone. He went to meet them in person. He wanted a face-to-face with them. You know what you call that? You call that a criminal conspiracy. Or under white supremacy, you just call it business as usual. Polka, as well as others in the LAPD, made sure the report was buried, and they made sure to keep Moonves' victim quiet. But of course, the truth never stays buried forever. Eventually, Golden-Gottlieb went to Ronan Farrow, and Moonves was finally forced to face the music. When the story broke, rather than refrain from all contact with CBS and its employees, instead, Captain Polka sent one of his CBS contacts a note saying, "We worked so hard to try to avoid this day." He also sent Les Moonves a note saying he was sorry and "I will always stand with, by, and pledge my allegiance to you." This is a so-called police officer who said this. He pledges his allegiance not to the law, not to the people of the city he swore to serve and protect, but to a white media executive. This is how cozy the relationship between the police and the white media is. They pledge allegiance to one another. The white media protects the police by refusing to run stories about police criminality and misconduct, and they attack anyone brave enough to challenge the police, and the police bury any criminal complaints against figures in the white media. Yeah, it's real clear now why the white media makes it a point to attack anyone who questions the cops. And why they make sure, well, we got all this dirt on the police, but we're not going to tell you about any of their prior complaints from the public. We're not going to tell you about all the dirt in the police's service record whenever they kill someone. We're going to pretend like we don't know about it. It's a mutual protection racket. One hand protects the other. You can't say one hand washes the other because with the white media and the police, both their hands are dirty. Now, Polka retired just last year, but look at how long it's taken for this cover-up to finally be brought to the surface. And even after all this, Moonves isn't being subject to any criminal charges. Neither any of his cohorts and co-conspirators. No heads are rolling. As the old saying goes, white supremacists don't go to jail, they go to court. In fact, it's already been buried again. Letitia James has agreed to a so-called settlement with Moonves and CBS. Together, they'll have to pay $30.5 million. The LA Times reports that Moonves is only on the hook for about $2.5 million of that. That's not even a fraction of the payout that he got for his severance package when he got kicked out of CBS. And when you look at the hundreds of millions that he made over his tenure there over the decades, $2.5 million is pocket change for Les Moonves. The money is supposed to go to sexual assault and harassment programs. The rest will go to CBS's shareholders. I'm not making that up. That's what the agreement was. That there's going to actually be money paid to CBS's shareholders over this because they were allegedly kept in the dark while the executives were plotting with Moonves on how to keep all this covered up. And by the way, by shareholders, they mean people like Sherry Redstone, the daughter of longtime Viacom boss Sumner Redstone. See, there are shareholders like the people who own a few shares for their stock portfolio. And then there's people like the Redstones, who pretty much own the company because they own so much of the company's stock. Sumner Redstone was also one of Les Moonves' closest buddies and fiercest defenders. So you got people who, for all we knew, were well aware of Moonves' rapacious ways, and they're now going to be getting a little money from Moonves and more money from CBS itself. So part of Letitia James's settlement is to allow CBS to give money to its own shareholders, which will most likely be invested right back into CBS. And by the way, if this circular payment scheme sounds familiar, it should. One of the things that came to light right after the Weinstein scandal broke was that the NYPD had already gotten a recording of Weinstein admitting to sexually assaulting a woman years before. But the corrupt DA, Cy Vance, refused to move forward with that prosecution at that time. And since it hadn't made the news, Cy Vance allowed the matter to die a quiet death. A few months after Vance refused to prosecute Weinstein, one of Weinstein's lawyers gave Cy Vance a donation for $24,000, and another of Weinstein's lawyers gave Vance $10,000. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence. And as for Polka, what's going to happen to him? I think it's safe to say nothing. But he wasn't alone. By that, I don't just mean that he wasn't the only cop who was taking part in this cover-up. I mean that the rest of the LAPD are just as dirty as he is and do the same things that he's done. And this is a police captain here, not some patrolman, not some night sergeant. This is one of the guys who ran the LAPD, one of their highest-ranking officers. And the corrupt ties between police and the white media are particularly rancid in Hollywood. In most other places, stars like to pretend that they're cops, but in LA, the cops like to pretend that they're stars. I mean that literally. Gene Roddenberry, the legendary creator of Star Trek, was himself an officer in the LAPD before he broke into Hollywood as a writer. The relationship between the enforcement arm of white supremacy and the propaganda arm are incestuous. Now we have documentation of what we already knew. The reason that Les Moonves wasn't touched by the LAPD was because they were refusing to touch him. They were protecting him. And it wasn't just one guy. It wasn't just the LAPD alone either. You see, Bill Cosby didn't have any police trying to protect him. But then again, Bill Cosby never drugged or raped anyone either. There was, however, a crooked DA and a corrupt judge who presented illegal evidence at his criminal trial, which they already knew was going to be thrown out on appeal. Oh, how different the white authorities act when they're actually trying to put someone in jail. And look at all of these other white stars and celebrities and executives who have not been merely accused but have admitted to their sexual impropriety. Louis C.K. is still on the loose. Matt Lauer and the rest of these predators ditto. The white media brings on their experts and others to lecture us that, well, the statute of limitations on these cases have passed. But as we've seen with Cosby, if they really wanted to bring a case, they would do it. But that kind of police protection only exists for people with the right skin color. And this is why we see people in the white media who have no problem bad-mouthing Bill Cosby nonstop, but they know not to mention Les Moonves under any circumstances, no matter how damning the evidence. They know not to mention Charlie Rose or Matt Lauer either. They know who the sanctioned targets are and who the sanctioned targets are not. The late-night comedians do not and will not make any white man accused of sexual misconduct into the subject of constant derision. They might do a one-and-done joke, but that's it. They're not trying to put attention on themselves. Julie Chen shouldn't be able to show her face anywhere, but not only is she not a white media pariah, this talentless harpy still hosts the same shows that she did before her husband was revealed to be a sexual predator. And not only did Julie Chen not resign, she didn't apologize for his behavior either. In fact, she went on TV and boldly referred to herself as Julie Chen Moonves. She didn't get the Camille Cosby treatment. The white media didn't have a problem with Julie Chen doubling down that she's not just Julie Chen. Now she's going to refer to herself as Julie Chen Moonves. They didn't excoriate her. That wasn't a scandal. And why not? Les Moonves and Harvey Weinstein were merely the tip of a very large, very ugly iceberg. Since the Weinstein scandal broke, only a tiny handful of individuals have lost their jobs, and Weinstein's the only one who went to prison. But what about the rest of them? And there's a hell of a lot at all levels, not just the executives, but also the so-called gatekeepers, like the talent agencies. They're still all in the same jobs that they had prior to the Weinstein scandal. And the police and these DAs are still protecting them. And the people who work in Hollywood know this. They know that the old life is returned and nothing has changed. And by the way, all of you who took part in helping to signal boost distractions like the lynching of Bill Cosby and the justified but overblown attention given to R. Kelly, take a bow. You're part of the reason that the status quo hasn't changed. The white media circled the wagons, and they pushed a nonstop torrent of anti-blackmail stories. HBO put out a so-called documentary that was nothing more than unsubstantiated fairy tales, phony gossip, and outright lies about Michael Jackson. Showtime put out Kamal Dumbbell's asinine little hit piece, We Have to Talk About Cosby. And Lifetime devoted practically most of its content to surviving R. Kelly. By the way, Showtime is owned by CBS. But then again, I'm sure that's just another coincidence. I'm sure the white media would never put out propaganda pieces claiming to be news and then use their own propaganda to distract from the criminality of the men who run these companies. That would be ridiculous. Next thing you know, these white media executives will be conspiring with the police to silence their victims. Oh, wait. There was never any doubt that R. Kelly was going to go down, but the legions of rapists and molesters in the white media companies, they were given cover until the issue died down. See, if someone accused a black man of wrongdoing, we don't have the ability to flood the airwaves with other people's faces and names to get the heat off of ourselves. But the white men who run the white media are in the privileged position where they can do exactly that, and they have. These white media moguls like Ari Emanuel manufactured and funded the so-called Time's Up organization, and then white media companies like CBS gave Time's Up massive coverage. This was done in order to bestow instant legitimacy on them, because most people tend to put the most stock and faith in whatever person or organization is most visible to them. And what did Time's Up do during their short lifespan? They spend most of their time obsessing over Bill Cosby and R. Kelly. And now that both of those men are otherwise no longer able to be used as a white media distraction, you're not hearing about them anymore. This was the plan from the very beginning. It's called controlled opposition. They do it in politics all the time, so it's child's play for them to do it in a media that they own and control. So while it's good that we have confirmation of everything we've been saying about Moonves for years, we have to remember that this outcome isn't justice. Justice means punishment. And Moonves has not and isn't being punished. We already knew that he was a sexual predator and that the thugs in the LAPD were protecting him. We already knew that these white media executives were working hand in hand with Moonves to protect him and by extension themselves from any sort of punishment. We already knew that perverts like Moonves run their white media companies like a mobster runs his street gang. The question is, when will any of them ever be punished? We all know that the friends of Moonves are still out there, in the same jobs they had prior to the Weinstein scandal, prior to the Moonves scandal. And the next crop of perverts and degenerates are coming up right behind them and abusing victims right now. Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see how long it takes before they're finally found out. And when that day finally comes, I'm sure that Letitia James or some other state attorney general will simply ask them to pay a fine, and they'll tell the public that the statute of limitations had run out. And the show will continue to go on. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Famously Blacker, Gregory Franklin, Argentria Harden, Michael Kay, and Akmal Griffith. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.